Welcome everyone for this open panel, this online event. We've been planning this for many months. I think we started to talk with Jamie perhaps last year, actually. There were a few emails, and the idea was to provide with a series of webinars that talk about the publishing landscape with all many issues that might be associated with that, response to reviewers, open access, the role of editors, and so on. There are so many questions, I guess, that early career researchers have in their minds, and this idea was to provide an open discussion about some of these issues. And we wanted to have all voices, wanted to hear all voices. So for that reason, we also prepare an online survey, and where everyone can, add their comments and their ideas and reflections, specifically on the topics that we're going to discuss today, which is how to deal with reviewer experiences, challenges, and advice on publishing for ECRs. And as you can see here in the screen, so we have this chatted person, which is they're supposed to be reviewer number 2, this famous, perhaps sometimes infamous reviewer that provide with some tough and critical comments. So the idea was to have an open discussion about how to deal with those comments, and we wanted to have all different perspectives. For that reason, we started a collaboration with the journal PLOS Climate. So we are very excited and we're very thankful to PLOS Climate to participate in this open panel. We have Jamie Males, which is the Executive Director of PLOS Climate from the United Kingdom. So Jamie, how are you?
Really well, really pleased to be here. Looking forward to what should be an interesting discussion.
Thanks, Jamie. We also are very excited to have Martin Siegler. He is an assistant professor and from Utrecht University, and also the paleoclimate section editor for PLOS Climate. So Martin, good to see you here.
Hi, welcome. Nice to meet you all. Looking forward to this.
Okay, and from PAGES Early Career Network, we have myself, which is Ignacio Jara. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Tarapacá in Chile, in South America, and also member of the PAGES Early Career Network steering committee. And I'm also very excited to have Kamila Faizeva here. She's talking from Vienna, and she's a PhD student of the University of Vienna, and also a member of PAGES ECN steering committee. So Kamila, good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nacho. Yeah, I'm super happy to be here.
Okay, good. So this is the structure of the webinar, so which is, I guess, divided in 2 main sections. So first, we're going to give the floor to each of the panel to provide with a brief 5 minutes comment on their different perspectives. So we're going to start by the PAGES ECN, who is going to give a little bit of insight about an early career who's just trying to publish their first results and how challenged that could be. And also we're going to have Martin, who is going to provide with a perspective from a reviewer, perhaps an editor as well. And also we're going to give the floor to Jamie, which is going to provide with the perspective of executive editor or publisher in general. So we're going to see these issues from different point of view. And after that, we're going to have our second part where we're going to present the results of our survey. And also we're going to comment on some of the answers, some of the replies that we got from it. So yeah, and obviously we're going to open the floor to the audience if you want to have any comments or questions to the panel. So I just wanted to start by with a few bullet points that we prepared with Camila about some tips and advices that we discussed with our ECRs colleagues. And one of the first things that we came up with was about dealing with the review comments was that at that earlier stage of your project, of your paper, it's very good to have a good idea of what are the journals that you want to aim, what are the journals that you want to publish, and perhaps not only have one single option, but perhaps more than one. I don't know if you Camila wanted to say something about this.
Yeah, I think at the early stages of any project, especially if you like plan to write a paper, it's necessary to have some kind of um, table with different journals in which you can write a lot of different information about journals. You choose something like metrics or which topics the journal can consider for acceptance. And yeah, so to avoid any disappointment, yeah, it's necessary to have several journals in mind. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Camila. So other things that we talked was that we always have to have in mind that the review process, which sometimes can be really tough, has a final goal to improve the quality of our research. I think so many times we are pressured to, to publish our first results if we wanted to, complete our PhD or finish a postdoc, and improving the quality of manuscript is most of the times really slow and tedious process, and we're sometimes so goal and objective oriented that we forget to to the importance of the process and to finally enjoy the process, because sometimes we ended up very frustrated of how much time does it take to get your research published. And some of the times we get negative feedback from a manuscript that we submitted. Many times, or most of the time, that manuscript took a lot of time, effort, collaboration, and that could be really disheartening, and it could be very frustrating. So I think something that it was very important for us was just not to take the comments on a personal side, and I think this is a very tough thing for many ECRs, because we are so personally committed to our research. We're so personally committed to our PhD project or postdoc project that when it is criticized or heavily criticized, we tend to take those comments into a personal side, and that can be not the best way to go, I guess. We need to kind of separate what it is our personal development with our professional development. And something that is also very important, and it's something that we discussed, and I had no idea about it. It was that we also have the option to contact the editor. I think that perhaps Martin and Jamie can refer to this as well. But sometimes we have the fixed idea that our role was only to respond to any comments, any review that we get from the reviewers. But we sometimes forget that we also have the option to contact the editor to seek any clarification if we don't understand any comments. And I think that perhaps the role of the editors is also just to be open and perhaps remind the authors that they have that options, that the editor is here to help and to provide feedback on the comments provided by the reviewers. Something that also is related to the points that I mentioned earlier is that since we are personally invested on our research, it's very easy just to take a defensive side, take a critics from a personal side and be very defensive and confrontational with the reviewer, with the comments that we get, and I think that might actually backfire in the long term. So I think it is a good option for us just to be open and to realize that that there is obviously always space for improving the quality of your manuscript. So if we are sure that our manuscript is 100% finished by the time you submit it to the journal, I think that is gonna in the long term is going to give you some problems, and it could lead you to frustration, and the final thing that I would like to comment is that in the case of a reaction, don't give up. This is something that I can perhaps take on a personal note, because a few weeks ago I think we commented this with Jamie and with Camila and Martin, that I got a rejection. It was perhaps the first time that I got rejected from an article, so it was a bit painful and a bit frustrating. But I guess the idea is just don't give up. You spend a lot of time, effort, energy on producing a manuscript, and the worst things that you can do is just to leave it aside. I think it is time to think about a different journal, perhaps, take all the reviewers and editor comments. We got a long list of comments from the reviewers. We have a very well fundamented editor's decision, in this case, reaction. But I think that we can use that as an input to come up with a new version of your manuscript, which obviously is going to be improved based on the suggestions, comments that were provided in the initial submission. Yeah, so I think this is from our side, and I think the next one will be Martin, we're going to give the floor to Martin, who is going to give us some insights from from the other side now, from the side of our reviewer. So Martin, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think there were lots of good points already in your introduction here, and I'm probably going to repeat a few. But maybe I'll introduce myself a little bit more again. So I'm assistant professor at Utrecht University. I'm actually calling in from Scotland at the moment, where I'm on a little sabbatical. I'm a oceanographer. I work mainly on reconstruction of sea surface, deep sea temperatures, also occasionally terrestrial temperatures using clumped isotope thermometry. This is what I do for my own research mainly. And I've recently actually also joined PLOS Climate's editorial board for the paleoclimate section. And so I'm also myself relatively early career in the role of an editor, but I have quite some experience as an author and also reviewer. So I published my first paper, I think something like 15 years ago. And have been involved in, I think, more than 60 papers. So I've seen all kinds of reviews coming back from rejection to acceptance without changes. So everything is possible. And I think, and you mentioned this already, this is really very important, I think, for an early career scientist to realize that rejection to some extent is normal. And then this happens to senior scientists and early career scientists, and also very experienced professors become very frustrated when their papers become rejected. But it is in science somewhat normal, especially in the first round. You very often get a rejection, and you shouldn't. It's easier said than done, but you shouldn't be too disappointed about it. Of course, a little bit of disappointment is part of it, but yeah, you should accept it as being part of the process and getting a chance to actually improve your manuscript, even if you have worked on it already for months or sometimes years. But yeah, after first submission, it can unfortunately happen that some of your peers will disagree with some of the things that you have said or written down, and then you might have to change it, either really the content or simply the way you've written it down. So yeah, one of the things that have been mentioned, and this is also something I'd like to convey here again, don't take things personal in the review. I think this is also the way written communication sometimes works. The interpretation, sometimes you interpret things into a review that was actually not meant that way by a reviewer. So yeah, don't take it personal, but take it seriously. So what I've seen in the past, and also colleagues here complain about, is that when a paper is submitted and gets a rejection, that the author basically submits the same manuscript unchanged to another journal, and chances are that you actually get the same reviewer that rejected it in the first place. has taken some time to actually give you arguments why it should be changed, and then the same reviewer gets. So this is really a kind of worst case scenario, I would say. Really make sure that you take the criticism on board to some extent. It doesn't really have to, if you disagree with the reviewer, you can maybe change your argumentation, but take it on board in some way. So take the reviewers seriously. Also, what you can do is make the life of a reviewer easy, right? So if you respond to a reviewer, respond to all the individual comments. You can also change in the document with different colors in your text. Refer to your line numbers in your manuscript. Use track changes in your manuscript. So if the reviewer sees the manuscript again, that he or she can actually easily follow what you have done in the review, in the revision process. That will help a lot, and that will increase the chances a lot of your paper getting accepted in a second round. And another thing I think that's also useful for an early career scientist is getting used to the review process. And of course, that's difficult if you are just before submitting your first paper. But what you can do is, for example, go through reviews and discussions in journals like Climate of the Past or Biogeosciences, where the review process is completely online. And you can actually see what reviews look like, what reviewers, author responses look like. And I think it's very useful to go through these documents and see how a paper from an initial stage also changed in the course of a review process. And you can learn a lot from that. And you can also go to your supervisors and to your peers and ask them if they would be happy if you can get involved in their own reviewing activities. That even though reviews are confidential, it's possible that a scientist gets in touch with the editor and says, okay, I'd like to review this together or discuss that with my own research group or with my PhD student. And then you can also, at an early stage, already get a little bit experience with the other side, with the reviewer's perspective, and see how that works. So these are some of the kind of important take-home messages from my side, and I'm of course happy to discuss this further with you, or just answer your questions, or share some of the frustration that you've experienced. But yeah, I think this is just part of it, and you will get used to it and enjoy it.
I'm getting used to it. All right, thank you very much, Martin. That was very helpful. And I think there's one slide here, just to give the floor to Jamie, who's going to provide now the perspective from the person who is in charge of the editors and the passenger. So Jamie, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and just to say that the real purpose of the slide here is just to provide some links to some other resources that might be helpful for people on the course. So I think the plan is that we will send out a copy of the slides at the end of the webinar, so that anyone who wants to be able to click on these links later on will be able to do so. And that will just take you to some resources that PLOS Climate and PLOS have made available that you might find interesting and helpful, both from the perspective of the author, but also for when you are engaging as a peer reviewer. There are some kind of tips and tricks for best practices available there. But just to take a step back and sort of reintroduce myself and give you a quick sense of my background and what I now do on PLOS Climate. I'm actually a plant ecophysiologist by training, so not very closely connected to paleoclimate. But when it got to the end of my PhD, I decided to make the switch to working in publishing. That was essentially because, although I'd really enjoyed doing lots of exciting exotic field work in the Caribbean and in Central America, I'd realized that what really stimulated me was the way that science was then disseminated to different audiences, and also lots of questions around open access and open science and how that relates to questions of equity in terms of global participation in research and in publishing. So that led me quite quickly to join PLOS. It was very serendipitous that I did my PhD here in Cambridge. And at the time, PLOS's kind of second headquarters, its European headquarters, was in Cambridge. So that's how I ended up working with PLOS. And I spent several years working on the journal PLOS One, which I'm sure many of you will have heard of. PLOS One is a mega journal which publishes research right across the breadth of science. And during my time on PLOS One, I was actually just checking back on the numbers, and I think I was in one way or another involved in the peer review of about 5,000 papers on PLOS One. So I have quite a lot of experience, at least of overseeing peer review across papers from many different disciplines. And when PLOS decided to launch a group of environmental journals in 2021, I put myself forward to take control of PLOS Climate, which has been a really fascinating learning curve to set up a new journal from scratch. For those of you who've not come across PLOS Climate before, it is a multidisciplinary journal that tries to bring together researchers from the physical sciences, people who are working on social sciences and climate change impacts, through to mitigation, policy, and everything in between. So it is a very wide-ranging journal in terms of its scope, but what unites it is this sense that we need to be bringing together all of those voices and perspectives to drive forwards progress on climate action. And of course, a really important component within that is understanding the long-term evolution of the Earth's climate and of regional climates. And so paleoclimate, I think, has a fundamental role to play in informing not just kind of the collective scientific endeavor around contemporary climate change, but also the strategy that a journal like PLOS Climate might take in this space. So we've been working hard to try to kind of establish the paleoclimate section within PLOS Climate over the last couple of years. So yeah, just to go back to my personal experience, during that PhD, I was, like many of you, scrambling around to write up the work that I was doing. Somehow, in the end, I managed to spew out, I think, about 15 or 16 papers, because it was a very wide-ranging PhD. It's quite bitty, lots of different elements to it. But it did take a long time to get some of those papers out. Some of them went through very painful review processes. And I should say that the very final paper of my PhD only got published last year. So that was a good 6 or 7 years after the PhD finished. So yeah, it can be a slow and laborious process, but it's worth being persistent, as I think has already been touched on by the other speakers. So to give you a sense of what a staff editor for a journal does, like myself, in my current role, I'm the executive editor at PLOS Climate, which means that I'm ultimately accountable for all of the editorial decisions that happen in the journal. Sometimes that means that individual decisions get escalated to me. Sometimes it means that I'm the one who's actually handling the paper. And in that capacity, I obviously have to be prepared to arbitrate between reviewers and editors, authors who sometimes aren't happy with how their paper is being handled, or comments that they've received. So I've seen all sorts of different situations arise. And I think the one message that kind of comes through from all of that experience is the importance of two things, really: goodwill on the part of everybody involved. Ultimately, as I think has already been stressed by the other speakers, the idea of peer review is that it's something that should support progress and rigor in science, and that's something that we should all have a vested interest in. So trying to approach it in a dignified, objective, and an understanding manner, I think, is something that we should all keep at the forefront of our minds. Obviously, that particularly goes for those who are in a position of power, as far as there is a power dynamic involved in these things. So that's really true of particularly of the editors. And I would say that editors have the most crucial role to play in terms of helping to effectively relay the reviewers' feedback to the authors and to allow the authors to understand how they can best respond to that. And the other thing that goes alongside that is the clarity of communication. And so the editors and the reviewers have a responsibility to ensure that they are providing their feedback in a way that's accessible to the authors, but it also bears on how the authors respond as well. So as an author, when you're preparing your revisions, it's really important to explain in a clear manner how you've gone about addressing the feedback that you've received from reviewers and from editors. It goes back to what Martin was saying about making the reviewers' lives easier. Same goes for the editors. If you can really clearly explain the steps that you've taken to improve the manuscript during that revision process, I think that's probably the most important thing you can do to maximize the chances that it's ultimately going to be accepted for publication, or at least that the whole process is completed in a timely manner. So that's just a few quick initial thoughts, and I'm very much looking forward to getting into some deeper conversation around the various issues around peer review. I'm happy to talk about the role of journals in terms of the policies that they might develop or enforce around peer review and making peer review as objective and constructive as possible. Also happy to get back to something that Martin mentioned around open peer review and how the publication of reviewers' reports alongside accepted manuscripts can be useful, both in terms of learning about peer review for ECRs, but also hopefully increasing the transparency and the rigor of the peer review process as well, and holding everybody to account in how they're contributing to that process. So I think that might be an interesting topic of conversation for later on. But I'll stop talking for now, and looking forward to touching on
thanks.
some other
Thanks,
aspects.
Jamie. I think we still have a few time. So we just wanted to ask you. So you mentioned about make the life of reviewers easier. So that means that perhaps in addition to the response to the reviewers, like one by one, also provide with an initial paragraph where you just summarize, how the manuscript has been improved since like a summary of all the changes that you have made, not only the responses as well. No, that would be very useful.
Yeah, very much so. I think anything you can do to recognize the fact that the reviewers are humans who are having to manage this and navigate this process as much as you are as an author. And again, I say this on behalf of editors too. I think anything you can do on that front will be appreciated and contribute to that sense of collaboration within the process. So as I say, I think everybody has a stake in making that peer review process successful. And by successful, I don't necessarily mean that the paper is going to be accepted, but that it's going to undergo a rigorous and thorough evaluation in the sense that is justified and unwarranted. So yeah, I would definitely encourage you as an author to do exactly what you just described.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. So yeah, as I said earlier, we prepared like a brief survey to gather the experiences of ECRs, facing some of this challenge. And so I'm gonna just leave now Camila, who is going to just give us the results. So Camila, there you have. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Nacho. So I would like to, before we dive into survey results, I would like to give one comment regarding how to deal with harsh feedback. So I think for early career researchers, including me, because I'm on my PhD level, and yeah, we kind of have to get used to the practice of receiving feedback in general, because I think we really tend to kind of gatekeep our research because we are afraid that we'll be judged or misunderstood. And yeah, and we can ask for the feedback our close circle. Okay, it can be family member, or it can be partner or friend. And yeah, I think it's also helpful to get used to the idea of getting feedback. Okay, you see what I mean?
Yes, I do see.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, that was just my comment. So we can dive into survey results. So yeah, so basically we made a survey asking early career researchers if they have ever been unsure about how to respond to reviewers' feedback, or if they ever felt some kind of challenged. And yeah, next slide, Nacho. Surprise, surprise. Absolutely everyone's struggling, of course, and this is normal. And we asked our survey participants if they can give us some insights with which challenges they faces. Okay, next slide. So we selected several comments, and this one is one of them. So sometimes I found it strange how one moment, I'm going to hide this window. So sometimes I found it strange how some journals proceed with desk rejections based on the not adequate subject for the journal. To avoid losing time, I move quick to another journal. Okay, so Jamie, would you like comment on this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So this is an interesting comment, and I think it maybe touches on a few different issues around the way that submissions to journals might be treated in those first stages. So on the one hand, I think there's potentially a question around the scope of the journal and how the journal's editors view the journal and its mission, its community, what it's trying to achieve. And so if you're submitting a paper which the editors feel doesn't align exactly with that kind of vision that they have, then it's quite possible that they will decide that it's not worth taking it forward to peer review. What I would say is that some journals are better than others at articulating what that vision is. So by just browsing a journal's website and reading, the brief description that they put there about what the journal is all about, it sometimes is hard to gauge what kind of threshold or bar the editors might be setting for themselves when they are engaging with submissions. Usually we're talking here, I guess, about things like novelty. So as you'll be aware, a journal like, I don't know, Science or Nature, for instance, is obviously looking for research which they consider to be really groundbreaking and a major advance in the field. For other journals, that's not necessarily the case. Similarly, related to this, there are questions around the relevance of a particular piece of research to different contexts. So, for example, you might have a study which is quite specific to a regional system or regional context, and it's not at least immediately obvious how it could be applied in a different part of the world or a global scale. And that likewise could be a reason why a journal editor might feel that it's not something that they would want to prioritize for publication in their journal. And again, that relates back to how they have defined and explained the mission of the journal in terms of publishing and promoting work, which is of relevance to different demographics and audiences. So I think as far as possible, it's good to try to get a sense of whether a journal that you might be interested in envisions itself as being a venue for work that really focuses at that very global scale, a very kind of high impact work, or if it's a more inclusive venue that is willing to consider submissions which perhaps are quite restricted to a particular region or country, a particular method, or a more kind of incremental advance. So trying to gauge where on those various spectra your research falls and how that relates to the interests of the different journals that you're familiar with, I think is worth doing before you go down the route of actually preparing the manuscript to the particular requirements of any given journal. And I would finally also say that if you do receive a desk rejection for these reasons, and it's not clear to you why you have received that decision based on what you can see of how the journal has described itself, then as Nacho was alluding to earlier, you should not feel afraid of contacting the journal, whether that's a handling editor who's been assigned to the paper or just to the journal office through their kind of generic email address, and just ask if they could provide a slightly more detailed explanation for why you received that decision. and then you might be able to enter into a bit more of a conversation to understand whether there's anything you can do to the paper to bring it more in line with their expectations if you're still keen to publish in that particular journal. Or it might nevertheless help you to make decisions about how to revise the paper to make it stronger or more suitable for a different venue, like Martin was saying earlier. So yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks. I don't know if you can briefly refer to. So I'm thinking about. Do you think that to avoid this sort of test reactions, it would be useful to explain how your manuscript just fits to the journal vision in the cover letter? Do you think that will be something useful or can help to, avoid these really bad decisions that your paper is rejected without even having a review?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say that yes, it's definitely worth trying to write a thoughtful and engaging cover letter. I can't guarantee that every journal and every editor is going to engage with that cover letter really thoroughly and really take it into account in terms of how they think about the paper. But there are certainly a good proportion of editors who do still do that, and I think they should do that. And again, it does come back also to the editorial model of the journal that you're submitting to. So for example, for a journal like PLOS Climate, all of the submissions that come in are initially assigned to a staff editor like me, who will definitely read through the cover letter and use that as a means of deciding whether it's something that's in scope for the journal. And we can then use that to decide whether we want then to assign it to an academic editor who will handle the peer review process. For other journals and other publishers, there might be a different model where it perhaps just goes immediately to a member of the academic editorial board, and their behavior is perhaps a little bit more variable in terms of how widely those cover letters might be read or not. So I think it's worth doing as a kind of safety net approach, and it can also be helpful further down the line for editors and reviewers to be able to refer back to that cover letter at the revision stage as well. So yeah, I think make use of that as another opportunity to explain and sell your work to the journal and the editor.
Oh, thank you, Yemi. Yeah.
Okay, so shall we move on? Okay, thank you. So then we have a second comment. So this idea that a native speaker of a language would be always grammatically better in that language than someone else's racial, there is no logic in it. So yeah, I think the person meant that, yeah, it's racial stereotype or yeah, something like this. So maybe Nacho, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah. Well, I think that the point of this comment is something that we face. I'm not a native English speaker, and sometimes this is really hard work for us to come up with manuscript which we think has a great idea and great results, but sometimes you get rejected because the language is not appropriate, or your paper gets really or the process of getting your work published, it's becoming slower because of the language. Can be very disappointed for a non-native English speaker, and I think that this is actually brings up a really important issue, which I think it is inclusivity. What happens with an editor or reviewer that sees an article that perhaps it is not really well written, perhaps the data that is presenting is not the best one, maybe they could have done a better job, but still the authors coming from local institutions who are working in an area where the university or the affiliations are, and they obviously, especially in less developed countries, they struggle with budgets, with financial support, and sometimes to publishing an article in a good journal, it might be a big difference in terms of the development of science in those regions. So I think that might be an interesting issue to explore in terms of how open are editors or reviewers to have a different consideration with this sort of manuscript? Is everything is about the quality, or perhaps there are another, facts, political facts or equality facts that they might also be put it in the equation? I don't know if Martin wants you comment on the, or Jamie, I don't know.
Yeah, I can comment on this. So first of all, I think that the sentence that's here on the slide, I would say that's inappropriate. I mean, as a reviewer, you cannot even judge if the person is a native speaker or not, right? You don't know the CV personally, so you're probably judging it from the name. Or anyhow, I think that you doesn't matter if it's a native speaker or not. If there are a lot of spelling mistakes in a paper or a lot of grammar mistakes, then of course that is something that should be addressed in a revision process. But that's irrespective of if it's a native speaker or a native co-author on there or not. So that would be my comment on this one. About the question, if you basically, if I'm understanding you correctly, but maybe you can correct me if you like, Ignacio.
Yeah, sure.
But should there be different standards depending on where a manuscript is coming from? And there I would actually say no. I think the scientific quality is guiding. And so if you say the data is not good, so what is not good data, right? So if the data collection process is transparent, if the associated errors that are given on your data are well presented, then the data might be more uncertain, but it's not necessarily bad data. If the scientific process, the interpretation is not sound, then it's a cause for rejection or requires revision. Again, that is irrespective of where the paper is coming from. So
yeah. Well, just if I may, so you mentioned about different standards. I think that is an interesting point there, because for instance, when you're applying for scholarships, some institutions have different standards. So they have a special consideration if you're coming from a less developed country, or if you're a female, because obviously there is the need to provide with more opportunities in terms of getting published. Getting an article published might be a big way, to support a local institution, to support, ECRs researchers who are perhaps coming from, less developed countries that they struggle to, get a research that is perhaps comparatively with a lower standard than another researcher from a developed country. But, you see the point. There are, I don't know, my question is, should these factors also be considered?
Yeah, so in this case, when it comes down to providing a scholarship, I would say absolutely yes. There's a lot of reasons to have different standards when it comes to funding someone's research, depending on where the funding is coming from. But there are very good reasons to say, okay, maybe this researcher has not published as much yet, but that's related to the situation in which that researcher is currently situated. And that could be all kinds of reasons, right? The institution, it could be for personal reasons. Think of female researchers, parents, and so on and so forth. So there's lots of good reasons to have different standards when it comes to different aspects in academia. But I think when it comes to publishing a paper, and I think Jamie alluded to that beforehand, it's really about making sure that what's being published in a peer-reviewed article has gone through a evaluation if the science is sound. And there's different qualities in different papers, and that's okay. And some institutions, when it comes to producing data, have more funding and more possibilities to produce more, and in other papers there's maybe a smaller data set, but that doesn't mean that it's bad, right? But if there is if there's scientific mistakes, let's put it that way, then you shouldn't judge these differently depending on where the submission is coming from.
I see the point.
If I could just jump in, I think I would tend to agree with everything that Martin has just said. I think perhaps there's just a distinction to be drawn here between whether a submission is able to meet the journal's, if you like, scientific publication criteria in terms of the suitability of the methods that have been used, the underlying rationale for the study, the quality of the data and the analysis. Setting those things to one side, I think there is, in parallel to that, a question about the quality of the preparation of the manuscripts, and it goes back to this question about the quality of the written English as well. And I think there's perhaps an outstanding question there as to whether there's a role, a bigger role for journals and perhaps editorial boards to play in helping with some of the developmental editing that might need to go into those manuscripts to bring them up to a standard where the quality of the science in them is visible and accessible. And I think that's something where journals and publishers perhaps have more work to do to think about how best to leverage their resources and the collective experience and expertise of their editorial boards, remembering always that in general those editors and reviewers are volunteers, so we can't lean on them beyond what is reasonable, but thinking about maybe creative ways that we can help authors to lift their manuscripts to a state where they are going to be more able to meet those publication criteria and be suitable for publication.
Okay, thank you, Jimmy. I think that this issue is actually very interesting, and there definitely we can keep talking, I guess. But well, I think we have another question now.
Yeah, we do have. Okay, so this is the last comment that we got, and yeah, I still wonder why the journal editors don't invite the ECRs to review when at the same time a manuscript lies for months because they couldn't get any reviewer. So Martin, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, sure. I think I mentioned, or I had a comment on this earlier. I mean, it depends on what is meant here as early career researcher. But I think it's certainly the case that starting postdocs, and sometimes even I know that some of my own PhD students that I supervised have been invited to review manuscripts. So it's not something that is not happening at all. I agree it's a shame if manuscripts are not getting reviewed because a suitable reviewer is not being found while there hasn't been any suitable early career researcher been invited. So that would be a shame. But I think it's not a general rule that early career scientists cannot be involved in the review process. And as I said before, I only encourage every early career scientist to signal to their colleagues and to their older peers that they're willing to contribute to this and learn from that as well. And in my group, it happens regularly that I also share manuscripts with the group after, of course, discussing that with the editor also, and get also the opinion from early career researchers, and that can even be master students. That's really I think it doesn't have to be sometimes even early career scientists have a really good idea about certain aspects of a field because they're really into certain aspects of fields within the literature, and maybe they're not able to review all aspects of a manuscript, but certain aspects, methodological aspects, for example, or maybe statistics. can be different aspects that that early career scientists can review. And also, if you're invited and you feel unsure about your ability to review a manuscript, you can also communicate that to the editor, right? You can say, I would really like to do this. It's the first time that I'm getting asked to do this. I feel confident in reviewing this part. I hope that the other parts of the manuscript or certain parts of the methodology or certain data sets or models or whatever are being reviewed by other reviewers. So that's...
Yeah, I guess the message here is a little bit like, we are here, ECRs are here. We wanted to review articles.
Yeah,
I think we shouldn't be scared to put ourselves out there and to, I don't know, show some initiative. So yeah.
Again, I mentioned that also before. There are some journals, some cases, and maybe Jamie's going to talk about that a little bit. Excuse me. More, but there's this open review process. And there, in these open online discussions, you can also contribute to a review process, not anonymously, of course, but if you're not invited to review, however the paper is online, you are able to comment on certain aspects of a process. And in this way, you are able to take part in the discussion. And this also helps, I think, the reviewer or the other reviewers, but also the editors a lot, and also the authors, if there is, even if you have maybe small points of a manuscript that you would like to comment on, but nevertheless, you can also contribute that way to a review process.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to pick up on that and putting my open science advocate hat on, I would definitely encourage anyone to be on the lookout for any relevant preprints. So not just in those journals which have these dedicated discussion forums, but for papers which have been shared on more journal agnostic preprint servers, and to consider commenting on any aspects of those manuscripts which you feel able to comment on. And as Martin says, it doesn't have to be the full picture of the manuscript. It can just be an element of it with which you are most familiar. And that will help the authors to get that immediate feedback on the pre-review version of their manuscripts, but hopefully will also help subsequent reviewers and editors, as and when it does go through peer review as a journal, to take into account your expert feedback on the paper as part of that peer review process. And hopefully we're moving towards a more integrated ecosystem of research evaluation where it's going to be possible for that type of early feedback to be made more visible as part of the final peer-reviewed version of the manuscript once it does get accepted for publication in a journal. So yeah, definitely aim to be early adopters of engaging with preprints.
Well, yeah, I guess this question also brings up the subject of, how tough is just to get reviewers. I guess the feeling that is perhaps becoming harder and harder, because so review an article demands a great amount of time, energy, dedication, and as you mentioned, this is general voluntary work. So the question would be, so what would be, why should an ECR, who is invited to be a reviewer, should accept to be part of that, if that is going to just take a lot of your time? You're perhaps, finishing your thesis, you're really tough or working, trying to publish your results, and then you get an extra invitation, And so the question will be, so why this is a good opportunity for an ECR to be a reviewer? I don't know if you want to comment on this.
Yeah, I mean, I can comment on that. Maybe Jamie also has a view on this. I would say that's a question that doesn't only apply to reviewers, but all kinds of nice opportunities in academia where you always have to make the decision: do I want to take on board another thing, or do I have time for this? so why should you not do it? Maybe it's something that's not really in your field. Maybe it's a topic that you don't really care about, or where you don't feel qualified. Say no. Don't just do it because someone asked you, and you feel like, oh, that's a good thing to have been doing once. Why should you maybe do it if it's really a topic that you care a lot about, and you write a really thoughtful review, and the editor sees that, and the authors of the paper see that. That can also build your reputation as a great scientist, or a great starting scientist. And also I think you learn from it. Being a reviewer once will help you getting your next paper published where you're an author, because changing this perspective also helps you to understand the entire process. And so there's it's a yes and no question. I can't
Well,
say
I guess this is why we put on the flyer this idea of this shaded person, because you don't know the reviewer. Sometimes you're starting writing a manuscript, and then you ended up being a reviewer. So it's sort of like a positions, you can switch back and forth, and that makes things more interesting, I guess. So I guess the idea that if you are an ECR who are getting really tough reviews, and then you ended up becoming a tough reviewer, So I think the message will be there, trying to understand how the system works, and don't be on the defensive, and trying to accept comments that are harsh, but there are focus on getting or improve the quality of your work. I guess that will be the limit, and that will be the difference between a constructive and an unconstructive comment. I would guess. Yeah, I think. Do we have one more? I think that was the final question, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, but also we have a few very interesting questions from the audience. So the first one is from Georgie. So Georgie is also part of PAGES ECN steering committee, and he mentioned also a really important point, I think, is that rejection does not mean ECR. That doesn't mean that an ECR work is not good. Maybe just not quite the right fit for the particular journal, or that there are a few other things for you to address on top what it is already a good science. That's a good point. I mean, so if you are rejected, it's not that your article or your manuscript is bad science. Perhaps might be improved, or perhaps it is actually really good, but not designed or not meant to be published in that particular article. And I think that actually made me think of what Camila said. That is, it is very good to have a plan before you're submitting, to make a bit of a research on the internet and look for the journals and see a couple of options that might be relevant for your manuscript. That's good. We always have in mind like one single article and just go for it. Might be very useful just to have a few made a list of potential articles, so that if you get this desk rejection, then you got a second options right away. And I think we have another question. So I do wonder also, this is from an anonymous attendee. So I do wonder also, though, if the person who submitted this comment might have experience commenting along this line for a reviewer. So I think this refers to the previous comment, to this one here.
It was second comment, I think. It was comment for the second comment.
Yeah, I think this one here.
Yeah, this one, yeah.
And the person say, I have certainly the experience of a reviewer writing things like, this manuscript should be checked by a native English speaker, or something similar. This is an inappropriate statement. That is maybe harder to respond for an ECR than a scientific critiques. So we have experience of getting that sort of comments from our reviewer, and that would be unconstructive from my point of view. I don't know, what do you see it? So what is an editor doing when he just go through a review and see a sentence like this one?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I think in general, I think around this question of language, what I would say is it's really partly the journal's responsibility, not just the handling editor, but any good journal should be exercising a degree of oversight over the kinds of statements which are being made by reviewers and by editors and that are ultimately being relayed to authors, and intervening where appropriate. So, I mean, without getting into the details, there have been plenty of instances where I have had to get in touch with both editors and reviewers who've included phrases in their decision letters which I felt have not been appropriate for this kind of reason and in lots of different other contexts as well. And it's a question of entering into a dialogue with them to try to understand, whether there are underlying the way that they have phrased their concerns, whether there is potentially something more pertinent to the publication criteria that might need to be addressed with the authors, or alternatively, if that's not the case and it's it really is just that they have a problem that is not something that is relevant to the way that the journal looks submissions to be prepared, then we might simply remove that from the decision letter. So yeah, I think it is partly on the journal and the publisher to be prepared to intervene in those sorts of cases. While I'm speaking, if I could just really quickly point to a couple of answers that I've provided to questions that were shared on the Q&A. One very, very briefly was just about whether it's possible to share an abstract or the draft of a manuscript with the journal before submissions so that you don't have to go through all of the formatting work before getting a sense of whether or not the paper is likely to be deemed suitable for taking forward to peer review. And I would say, yeah, definitely get in touch with that abstract and ask the editors if they're willing to consider it. And they'll usually be very happy to just let you know if it's something that will be in scope and suitable. And there was also another question, which I'm not going to attempt to answer in detail now, about preprints. And in fact, there were various kind of sub-questions around licensing of preprints and copyright and how it relates to subsequent peer review in different journals. And what I've said on the Q&A is that I'm happy to put together a longer written answer to that question. I'm
That
sure
was a good one.
allay any fears that there might be.
Or perhaps organizing another webinar.
Yeah,
this is something,
could well be the basis for
that
an interesting discussion. Yeah.
Yes, this is something that we've been discussing with Jamie. So we're really happy to perhaps work on a second webinar for the second part of this year.
Mm-hmm.
And there are several issues that we thought about it. Well, we mentioned just some open access. That would be great. Just to understand what this big change of open access means for the publishing industry and also for early career scientists. And also open discussions. This was mentioned here several times. So this idea that the review process should be open, should be posted on a forum that everyone can comment on it. I think it's a very interesting idea, and I think we can perhaps find space in the future to talk about these issues. What do you think, Jamie?
Definitely, it sounds like a great idea, and yeah, the basis for some really interesting discussions. So I look forward to it.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone here from the panel wants to add anything else. Any comments, suggestion? Well, everyone fine. So yeah, just to finish, I wanted to thanks again, Martin, Jamie, for joining us today. As I said, this sort of webinars are not only there are very not common, not focusing on science, but in other issues, not focusing on new results and new presentations about science, but also other sites that might be very interesting and important and relevant for early career scientists in general. So thank you very much, and I hope we can see each other again in another panel discussion.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye. Goodbye. Okay.